I now wanted to introduce and bring to our panel three exceptional people. Samantha, of course, who all of you listen to. Shellye Archambeau, who is a board member at Verizon, Nordstrom, Roper Technology, and Okta, and has a tremendous amount of experience in the risk management space, having also served as the CEO of MetricStream for many years. And finally, Ken Bacon, member of the board of Comcast and Allied Financial, also a longtime Fannie Mae executive and co-founder and managing partner for RailField Realty Partners. So I'm sure I cannot do justice to their backgrounds in a minute, but I'll have them come on the panel, and as we go through the questions, you'll realize the number of years of experience and also how they're reacting, how they're helping their companies right now respond to COVID as well. The topic today really is focused on taking risk management to the front line. A lot of conversations have happened over the last few months on this topic, and we'll take their views in terms of how they are helping their companies. So welcome, Samantha, back, Shellye, and Ken.
Morning.
Thank you. So maybe, Shellye, we can start with you. You're in an interesting situation with multiple board positions right now, and companies like Verizon and Nordstrom are seeing the impact of COVID from almost two different extremes. So I just wanted to get your view how you're helping organizations balance performance in this unknown environment, and how acting your role as well as a board member, especially in the last 3 months.
I will tell you, Gaurav, it's been a crazy 3 months. And first of all, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this and participating. So if you think about the last 3 months, I've never seen anything like it. And I've been serving on corporate public boards for, 15 plus years. What you have is a situation that, frankly, despite all the risk work that was done, was still not addressed properly by most companies. Most companies did not foresee where businesses would literally shut down. So when you take a company like Nordstrom, where the majority of your revenue, because your store is closed, suddenly goes to zero, and then you look at a Verizon, where they've optimized the network for where business takes place, which is where companies are headquartered, not where people actually live. So the demands, right, are very, very different. But I will tell you, the approach that companies have taken have still been the same. So first, when it happened, it's all about addressing the impact and the crisis at hand. Are my employees safe? Are my customers safe? Are my suppliers safe? Then it's looking at the impact to the operations. Once you've looked at impact to operations, then it's focused on, okay, spending, cash spending, capital spending. What am I doing? How does this relate? You've got to update your situation analysis now with all this new data. Look at your strategic partnerships, et cetera. Once you've done kind of work, then you have to relook at the business plan and the impact to the plan, and then make necessary changes, adjustments, investments, whatever it might be, and also do a brand new risk assessment given all this new data. So whether you're a company, and no matter how you're being impacted, the process that you go through is actually very similar. But I'll tell you, in the beginning, probably the first, call it March to early April, the majority of the focus was on crisis mitigation. What's happening? How do we mitigate it? What do we put in place? I would tell you now, companies have all shifted to, all right, we're managing it. Now, what is the future? How does it impact our strategy? What needs to be changed? What trends might we take advantage of? So there's risk and opportunity, I like to say, are two sides of the same coin. So companies are looking at this in terms of mitigating risk, but also taking advantage of some opportunities that, frankly, these kinds of risks create in terms of how they invest, what they do, maybe speeding up initiatives that were already in place. So it's been a crazy time.
No, thank you, Shellye and Ken. I'm sure, given that you're on the board of two distinctly different companies like Comcast and Allied Financial, it'd be great to hear about your experience as well over the last few months. But equally importantly, how has this crisis been different from the others, in 2008 or even prior to that?
Okay. Well, good morning, and thanks for having me. I'd say that one common factor that both Ally and Comcast have is a culture that emphasizes operational excellence and reliability, because Ally is an online bank. So they've always had to be very sensitive to operational issues. And Comcast, as it transitioned from being a cable company to more of a broadband company, had to make investments in their infrastructure that they could be robust enough. So I'd say that for Comcast, the reliability of the network was something that they were always prepared for because the events of 2008, but particularly storms like the hurricanes, things like that, have given the company real world experience of reacting when things go wrong. The challenge this time was not as much keeping the system reliable, but was the fact that the demands in terms of speed and volume went up tremendously. Shellye mentioned how Verizon's focus, well, Comcast has always been focused on consumers, but all of a sudden, with everyone working from home, just the speed demands, the service demands went up exponentially. And so to handle that, Comcast had to do several things. The first thing they had to do was take care of their people, because all of a sudden, not only did we have people working from home, but we also had staff who were worried about their own health and their own safety. So they formed a COVID steering committee that not only had IT people and cybersecurity people and ops people, but they also had the medical officer. They also had HR. So the company had to make sure that the compensation systems, that the leave systems, everything was geared towards keeping employees engaged, keeping employees productive. And after that, this has presented an opportunity to advance some things that have been in the works. If any of you have had cable, you know that Comcast used to get slammed for customer service. So several years ago, the company embarked on an effort to improve customer service. And one of the things they discovered is that a lot of the frustration happened because people were waiting for human hands to solve the problem. So the company started creating more online tools and bringing artificial intelligence to the front line. But one of the problems is that we've all been conditioned when something goes wrong, we want the human voice. Well, with COVID, this has presented an opportunity because all of a sudden, not only did people want service, but now people were more willing to try the digital tools. So the use of the digital tools has just also increased exponentially. And that has been one good thing that's happened, because all of a sudden with people working from home, people realize, well, if I have a problem, let me go online, let me solve it. Because a lot of times people don't want a service person in their house, or they just want it done right away. So that's been an opportunity. And I'd say that the other thing that's really helped is that Comcast every day is running thousands and thousands of tests, checking the system for security, checking the system for speed and latency. And all the tabletop exercises that were done in the past have really borne fruit. So I just say that thing about preparation, investment, and something our speaker said earlier, you don't know what's going to happen. You know, risk management is about being prepared for the unexpected. And fortunately, Comcast was ready for that. It was more of a challenge, I'd say, for Ally being a bank, but bank regulators also are very big on tabletop exercises, on having redundancy into the system. So Ally, being an online bank, was probably better prepared than a lot of other financial institutions because they had to exist in that world already.
Thank you, Ken. And Samantha, you actually have covered quite a bit in the last session in terms of, how the COVID response and how, countries need to restart, companies need to restart in some capacity. Let me actually take your view on, how the cybersecurity world going to change, or is already changing in the face of this crisis and beyond. Especially, there's a lot of political questions that have come up for you. I'm going to avoid those, right now. But in terms of the U.S., facing even state-sponsored terrorism, or cyber terrorism, if you will, how is that posture going to change in the new normal?
Yeah, well, let me just quickly also mention from your last question to the two other panelists, sitting on boards myself, the other two parts of the organization that have really had to ramp up. One are government relations. because we're looking at the CARES Act. How do you interact with the local, state, federal level to make sure that you are getting the proper aid and assistance? I sit on the board of IGT, International Game Technology. We operate in work with tribes and tribal casinos. So having to deal with how they are looking at their connections with the federal government. So it's state, local, tribal, territorial. All of a sudden, your government relations team has become incredibly more important than you ever thought they were going to be, maybe. But also compliance. I work in a heavily regulated, the gaming industry. So compliance, this gets back to your cyber question. Know your customer, know your supplier, KYC, KYS. We're seeing the disruptions in the supply chain. It calls to mind how will it be in a cyber disruption, right? Who are our trusted providers? How are we working with them in the event that there is a major cyber incident? The connection back to the telcos, just a very, very quick comment. When I ran a tabletop 2 years ago now on continuity of the economy planning in the event of a cyber event, we had major banks present, we had grid operators, we had oil and gas represented, and we also had the telcos. And with when we said, well, how do you put in line who's going to be prioritized, the banks stood up and said, well, we need to be prioritized because we run the financial system. And the grid operator said, well, you can't run a financial system if the grid is down. And oil and gas said, well, 60% of grid is run off of oil, gas, and coal. So if you don't have us, you don't have a grid and you don't have the banks. And then the telco said, and if we're not there, no one's talking to each other. And so you can see the interconnectedness, so much so, and more and more with COVID, but it just overlaps with cyber.
No, thank you, Samantha. So one thing that we, at least in the last couple of months, that we have been talking to a number of CXOs, and what's emerging is that top of mind right now for the boards and for C-level execs, including CEOs and chief risk officers, are really three top topics. One is the headwind, economic headwind that's happening. One is the technology disruption, and third is cyber. So I just want to go to Shellye and Ken again and ask you that, disruption typically can be used as an opportunity and a threat, of course. So how are you guiding your companies in first thing is, are those the three things you're seeing too? And secondly, how are you guiding your companies on converting disruption positive for your companies?
Sure. So I'm going to add one to the three, but let me address the first three and then talk about the fourth that I also see. So headwinds. I mean, headwinds, yes, it's a struggle with purchasing down, buying down, travel down, et cetera. But companies have faced headwinds like that before. This is not unique. And I don't mean that COVID is not unique, but I just mean working through a challenging business time. As Ken talked, there's been multiple, right, in the past. So I think that's pretty straightforward. With regards to cyber, everyone's on very high alert. Cyber system, or your cybersecurity elements are definitely being strengthened if they needed to be, absolutely more monitored, and we are definitely seeing more activity on that side. So that one I feel also confident. Focus is there, but it's being managed. With regards to technology, it's interesting. If you look at it, companies like the ones that I'm on, Verizon, for instance, in the midst of all that, they actually publicly announced $1 billion increase in capital spend. So companies are looking to technology to actually help them get through not only this period, but frankly, position them for their strategic plans. So I fully expect to see technology, even if overall budgets decline, technology will not decline as much. And in some cases, it may actually be increased, because that is the way that companies are going to be able to deliver value to their customers. And that leads me to the fourth area, besides the headwinds that you talked about, cyber as well as technology. And that is fundamental consumer behavior change. And that is a challenge, because companies have spent years understanding their consumer, understanding what they want, how they buy, how they shop, et cetera. And with COVID-19 and the fact that people have been on lockdown for long enough for new habits to be formed. They say it takes 8 weeks for a habit. Well, guess what? So how their behaviors are going to change and how that impacts how they want to interact with each of the different companies is also going to be a challenge. The companies that figure it out faster and get in front of it, indeed, will win. I've always believed that in times of challenge and struggle like these, there's absolutely opportunities. I fully expect to see M&A activity. Companies with strong balance sheets will be able to take advantage of those companies that didn't have the strong balance sheets. So there'll be a lot of activity over the next 18 to 24 months as we see companies address the risks, but frankly, also look at opportunities and try to take advantage of those opportunities, like speeding up their technology plans that they already had in place. Ken highlighted some of the things that Comcast is doing. The same is true, whether it's Nordstrom, whether it's Verizon, Broker, Okta, everyone has had initiatives underway, and now they're all being sped up.
Mhm. Thank you, Shellye. I could echo a lot of the things she said. Let me just get into some things that I would emphasize. The economic headwinds presented the challenge for Ally because they're one of the largest auto lenders in the country. They have a mortgage business that's been growing. And so all of a sudden you had consumers who were hearing about forbearance programs who were like wondering what to do. So one of the challenges was to be agile enough to deal with the huge increase in customer calls and to institute new programs. You know, usually at a bank, when you make a change in a program, you take months to do that. Well, all of a sudden we had forbearance demands, an automobile portfolio, lots of calls we had to adopt on the spot. And that presented a challenge for risk management because, again, for a bank, the distinction between first line, second line, third line is very formal. So one of the things that we had to do was to use technology to track bottlenecks, productivity, usage, where are the problems. But then we had to get risk management, the second line, working hand in hand with the first line on a closer basis than would be the norm. So that was a challenge. And also was a challenge was the fact that, again, you know, you're used to getting people in a room to talk. Well, all of a sudden, you can't do that. So the need for constant communication. And the communication was not only around problem identification and mobilizing people to solve problems, but it was also about morale. Because again, we always have to be conscious of the fact that our employees could be stressed. So we had the economic headwinds. Cyber is always an issue. All of a sudden, you have people working at home. You know, when people are in the office, that's one set of behavior. But they're home, you have to worry is, you know, Junior going to be playing on Daddy's computer? How robust is their Wi-Fi system? So you have to increase awareness of this. Fortunately, the bank had emphasized a lot about phishing, about you know, playing with your work computer. So there was a certain discipline that had been built into the system. But again, you had to redouble your efforts there on cyber. And with technology, I'd say that again, that transition was smoother than I anticipated. I really thought we were going to have more snags. We've got very, very few people in the office, but things have gone without a hitch. So that's been a good thing. And I'd say being an online bank, again, like in Comcast, all of a sudden people who were maybe used to picking up the phone are now doing things online. So, you know, whether it's deposit inflows, whether it's investment decisions, whether it's mortgages, all of a sudden people are working from home and they're going to do even more business online. And for a company that has built their business model being an online bank, that has been an opportunity.
Hey, I tell you what, yes, well, Gaurav's trying to get on. Well, Gaurav's trying to get online. Samantha, why don't you and I talk about some of the technology aspects with regards to the challenges and the opportunities, right? We're seeing specifically the technology brings. And Riza, if you could yes, the background noise. Okay, wonderful. Samantha, you want to start and then I'll chime in?
Absolutely, because I do see both a challenge and an opportunity in terms of emerging technologies. So the challenge is there's going to be, and there already is, a great push to reduce costs, as we had talked about before, but to reduce workforce, right? Reduce workforce, both to reduce costs, but also reduce workforce, as Shellye, as you were talking about, because of changing behaviors and the way we work. So, for instance, and this has been evolving over the last couple of years, you can see how it could evolve further. There are 70,000 water utilities in the United States, right? Some of them are very, very small. Some of them are publicly owned and very, very large. And over the last number of years, these water utilities have put on monitoring systems so they don't have to send out people to go monitor the water supply and to make sure that the water is safe and potable. Great. It sounds great. However, the devices that some of them were using were incredibly vulnerable. They also, some of them happen to be made by a nation that is not too friendly with us. And having those devices put in the middle of our water drinking systems is of great concern to those of us who want us to have safe and secure water supplies. So you can imagine how COVID kind of really ramps up this kind of thinking through, great, we'll use this at a distance technology, sounds great, reduces cost, maybe reduces workforce, but is it secure and safe? That is the balance. Okay, so that is the kind of risky part. On a more positive note, in terms of technology coming down and again, how it might work to the effect of companies trying to understand their new consumer behavior. So we all heard about the promises, always promises of artificial intelligence, but there are great breakthroughs on small sample size data artificial intelligence. So where you don't need tens of millions of data points, perhaps you can have computers learn consumer behavior from a much smaller sample size, and it can be anonymized. And as these kind of breakthroughs come into being, companies, I believe, will be able to understand the changing behavioral patterns of their consumers much quicker, smaller sample sizes, and again, respecting the privacy and the rights of their consumers, which is going to be more and more important going forward.
I fully agree. If I could just add.
Go ahead,
if I could just add to that, Gaurav, when you talk about AI, just very practically, a couple of my companies have already started using AI as it relates to internal audit. And now that internal audit can't travel to go do the job that it needs to do, they are totally relying on both the AI as well as other systems and methods for actually continuing with the internal audit work. So it shows how AI and other investments that were being tried are now falling into the mainstream and really making a difference, which ultimately will make internal audit much more effective, much more efficient, and we should be able to audit more, which is actually a good thing for companies. So I'm sure people in the audience are seeing that as well.
No, Shellye, thank you. And that actually, your comment right now takes me to the next question, actually, that was as part of one of the key themes that traditionally, companies have looked at fourth, third, second line of defense as being the guardians and the, keepers of risk. With COVID, it's getting very apparent that the first line has to be involved a lot more, on a regular basis. I'm also starting to see companies where, using applications, they're trying to get information and observations from all the employees and the extended enterprise, right up, bubbling up to risk officers and to boards as well. So what is your feeling? And I'm going to address this to Ken first, and then Shellye and Samantha. How are you seeing the first line? How are you guiding your companies to get first line more deeply involved so that the pace of decision making and response gets faster?
Thanks. I'd say that if I look at a company like Ally, where we just reorganized all of our risk functions over a year ago, the front line, we were very fortunate in that we had a culture where the people on the first line were very risk sensitive. And what the second line has had to do in this crisis is, again, to accelerate modifications of policies and to be very adaptable. So, for example, we mentioned artificial intelligence. One of the things that we've had to do is we're having to make more credit decisions as people are unemployed. And it's often harder to get data because so many people are shut down. So we've had to become more expert in the use of alternative data when we're making decisions. That is something that, again, we were doing. This accelerated it. And again, the second line had to be hand in hand with the first line to make that happen quickly. The other thing I'd say is that we've actually had to have some people from the second line actually formally sit in sometimes, not only meetings, but maybe even customer calls so that they can get access to the information that much faster. So it's really helped speed things up. Being a depository institution, the one thing you have to do is maintain the integrity of the process, maintain the integrity of your policies. So while we've been very good about being adaptable, about modifying things, we've tried to avoid coming up with entirely new policies. We've tried to make what we have work better, work faster. And we've been very successful with that so far. And the other thing that technology has enabled us to do that we're doing more of is just tracking. The amount of phone calls coming in, the amount of complaints, the amount of problems, having that data such that you're not waiting months to make changes. You can see trends and say, hey, this is what's happened over the past week to my productivity. This seems to be the problem with our customers are experiencing. Let's make a change right now. Second line has the data, risk has the data, and they can work with the first line to not only make the change, but implement the change in a manner that's acceptable, not only to the bank, but to our regulators, to internal audit.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ken. Any other comments? I'm going to squeeze in a couple of questions in the time we have, Shellye, but go ahead, please.
Okay, no, I was going to, the only piece I was going to add is, as you start to gather data also from your front line, you have to make sure that when you roll it all up, that it's still reviewed from a strategic lens. So one of my companies, when we decided, okay, we've done the process the same every year, we actually broadened it and had a broader set of people farther down within the organization actually contribute to the risk factors. And we ended up with, when we summed it up, were risks that were risks to execution, like that year and maybe next year, but they weren't necessarily the strategic risks to the enterprise for the future based upon strategy. So yes, you need to pull the information in. Some new things do come, but it always has to have a lens that is a strategic lens. Go ahead, Gaurav.
No, thank you. Thank you, Shellye. Samantha, anything to wrap up on this? And I have two questions that are very important to address, very interesting questions. So go ahead, please. Yeah. So one question that's come up, a couple of times is that many of the audience members here right now are CXOs and practitioners who have aspirations to be board members. And all of you, are almost like career board members now. So what's the one or two pieces of advice you'll give to the audience here on how they can become effective board members, especially coming out of the environment that we're in?
Can I take it first? Yeah.
Yes.
So this is also a very interesting time. I'm sure Ken and Shellye would agree on the changing nature between the board and management, right? So, for those that are aspiring to be on boards, it's always this balance. Board members provide strategic guidance and advice and keep the company, moving in the right path while being able to ensure that risks and opportunities are being properly evaluated. But we don't get in management's knickers. Right, that's management's job. It's not a board's job to be in management's knickers. During this COVID crisis, at least my experience in talking to some other of my friends that are on boards, management is is actively seeking the more active guidance of the boards. We have been around for some time. We have lots of experiences. We're having board calls once a week now, where maybe they were maybe once a quarter. And so I'm not sure how it's going to change going forward, this relationship between the board and the management. But being on a board is a serious job and a serious responsibility. And when there are crises, you absolutely have to step up to the plate. And on the cyber side, there may actually be legislation coming down the pike to ensure that you step up to the plate. In the Solarium recommendation, we recommended that Sarbanes-Oxley be amended to include cyber risk, that the management and boards need to sign off on a cyber risk mitigation and understanding, and make sure that they have the right data. They don't have to invent it themselves. There are other frameworks. It's not one size fit all, but the board will have to be more involved in that understanding and that decision making. So I leave it to the other more experienced board members.
Sure. I'll add just a high level in terms of approach. First of all, it's remembering that your effectiveness is really based upon how you can help the company think about things, how you can expand their aperture potentially, how you can help them uncover risks, but it's not telling them what to do. So my biggest advice is focus on asking good questions. The better the questions, the better it gets management thinking, direction, raises points, but you don't want to be in a point where you're telling them what to do, because that's not your job at all. It's really to be there to help them, as Samantha just talked about. My other advice is have courage. There are times, and people who've worked for me know this, I have this concept of elephant in the room. A lot of times there's like this issue that still, even at a board level, you kind of sense there's this issue, but it's not being addressed or it's not being raised. Your job is to raise the issue. That's what the shareholders are paying you for, all right? You have to raise the issue. So ask good questions, number one, and two, demonstrate courage. Over to you,
Thank you, Shellye.
I'd say that one of the most important things you get out of an experience like we're going through right now is, what did you really learn in terms of wisdom? We all have areas of functional expertise, but when you take what did I learn from my particular function that's relevant to the CEO, what's relevant to the strategy of the company, and how does my expertise help shape that strategic decision? In my case, I always tell people I've got a PhD in bad deals and disasters. Savings and loan crisis, I actually worked in the government at the Resolution Trust Corporation at a policy level and a deal level. And you name every financial crisis, whether it's Katrina, 9/11, I've been at the table. And one of the things that you take away from that is, what did I learn and how can I apply that to the business? And that might be preparation, it might be training, it's culture. And so I think if you want to be on a board, you have to think what value you bring. And the value you bring is what I call wisdom. And wisdom, this might run counter to a lot of trends. I think you got to get a few gray hairs. You got to go through some crisis. Now, I'm the only one on the phone on here with a lot of gray hair, which I've earned.
Oh, no. This is called hair color.
I'm waiting for the barbershop to open to get this under control.
Aren't we all?
But I think just, and then Shellye said something that's very important, is courage. Courage, because a lot of times, cyber, I think if you go back to the early days, people always thought it can't happen here. And I'm sure that the voice who was saying, you better be ready, was often a lonely voice until something bad happened. And so having the courage of your convictions and knowing how to state your views, stand by your views, and be lonely sometimes is very important.
No, thank you, Ken, and thank you, Shellye, Samantha. Last question, I'm just for a minute,
wrap up with Shellye. Shellye, representative of all the board members on the panel, how do you get the time? I know you're authoring a book. You know, there's a couple of questions that have come up. They are aware that there's a pre-order, but you know, how do you get the time?
Oh man, you know, it's all about carving out the time. And thanks for mentioning the book. Unapologetically ambitious, take risks, risk fits, break barriers, and create success on your own terms. Thank you, Gaurav. But the best way is, honestly, you have to carve it out. Board service is a real job. And depending upon whose statistics you look at, you know, 200 hours a year, 250 a year, I'll tell you this year, it'll probably be 400 hours at least, because as they said, I'm on calls for every board every week. And it's never been like this before. So it is real time. You just have to carve it and plan it.
Thank you once again, Samantha, Ken, and Shellye. It's been fantastic, and I'm pretty sure we'll get a lot of good feedback, and I appreciate your time. You guys are very busy. I'm sure you're going to jump onto your next board call, but appreciate your participation. Thank you.